Thank you. Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this meeting of Review of Standing Orders Subcommittee. Meetings being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting. For the purposes of today, my apologies for not being there in person. If we can speak in the Teams chat function for those that are online, and I'll ensure that Claire and Tracy and co keep that updated for me for people who are in the room. That'd be really helpful. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it's intended as part of the discussion. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when rejoining the meeting so we can keep a track of whether we're quorate or not. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. And when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. And with that, we'll move on to item 1, which is the Sederant apologies and Chair's approval of members' remote participation. Claire, can you provide the Sederant and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got one apology this afternoon from Councillor Campbell. We've got Councillor Thompson here substituting for Councillor Campbell. We've got 3 members in the hall and 3 members on Teams. The members on Teams are yourself, the Vice Chair, and Councillor Brodie. Not present currently is Councillor Wood.
Thank you very much, Claire, and I approve members' remote participation. Item 2, do we have any declarations of interest? Not seeing anybody indicating. So with that, we'll move on to item 3, which is the annual review of outside bodies update report, report by Head of Governance and Assurance. And Tracy is here to assist members. Tracy, do you have anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report. I'll just cover what the report's asking members. Point 1 is it's including a revised timetable for the annual reviews, which takes on board the changes to some appointments which were made in March this year. So we're proposing to carry out annual reviews only on those bodies where appointments have been stable for the last 12 months, and reviews on those ones we're currently collating the information and it will go to the relevant committees following recess. And we've also updated our scheme, which includes 3 new bodies which are detailed at 3.9, which members are asked to approve today to add to the scheme. And we've got 3 bodies who are being removed from the scheme either because they're no longer active or they no longer wish member representation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Tracy. I've got Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Chair. Just on page 13, table 4, bodies removed the scheme due to response being received. Number 2, River Island District Salmon Fishery Board. As far as I know, I'm still the representative on that, and we required to be represented there because we have still have half net fishing's interest, which is pertinent to the Annan District Salmon Fisheries Board. So whenever that could be removed, remove the removal, if you like, please.
Thanks, Richard. Remove the removal. Tracy, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. That one was removed last May when we done the review through full council because the link officer advised that they hadn't made any contact. They tried several times and no response had been received, but I can certainly go back to the link officer and ask them to reach out to them again and see if they wish representation.
Yeah, it's something that we have to. It's something we actually have to apply to do because they'd be quite happy if the nets weren't represented on the River Annan board because obviously most of them are riparian owners. So I don't think you'll get a response from them because I'm already a member on the group. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Is there any way that we can progress that, Vlad?
I'm just seeing whether Tracy can help me out on this one. I'm not sure. We can take that away, and then maybe probably the best way to do it is take it away and then further consider it as officers, and then we'll come back. It's probably the easiest and best route for that.
Just we've been on the River Annan District Exam Official Board and it was since it started in the 1960s or 70s, I think so.
Okay, thanks, Richard. We'll maybe pick that up offline and come back to you just to ensure that we're fully covered in that respect of operations and membership, if that's okay. I've got Councillor Dryborough and then Councillor McFarlane.
Thanks, Chair. It's actually a new one that only affects Annandale East and Eskdale, which is Beckburn Wind Farm, which is actually on the English side of the border, but has 4 community councils in Annandale East and Eskdale, and 4 parish councils in the north of Cumbria, and they have a councillor from what is now Cumberland Council, and they want a councillor from the Annandale East and Eskdale ward to be basically advisory to the board. Now this is actually in place at the moment. Myself and Councillor Karen Carruthers were on as the 2 members before Cumbria split to the two councils. Now it's just 1 from each. It's already in place, but I am the chair of the appeals panel for that, and that's the local community grant scheme that they have in that particular area. So it's just, although it isn't the end of Dumfries and Galloway, the wind farm itself, the actual 1 member is required for there.
Thanks, Archie. Tracy or Vlad, maybe you could advise, because it's not a formal representation from the council, is it?
Sorry, Chair. I don't have any information on the actual body itself, so I can perhaps touch base with Councillor Dryborough with the meeting and gather the right information and bring it back if it's relevant.
Chair, I think you're absolutely right. It isn't a formal recognition as such, but it's just that the council is aware that 1 member for Annandale East and Eskdale is actually on that, because it's a totally different country. It's a different, where the wind farm actually is. So.
Good. Okay, again, I think if we pick that up offline just to make sure that we're fully covered in respect of our representation on outside bodies, and Tracy can come back to you, Archie, if that's okay.
Great, thanks.
Brilliant. Councillor McFarlane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Looking at 3.6, 7 and 8 on page 8, it's talking about changes in the administration and the need not to review certain outside bodies. I'm just mindful of the fact that change is a constant, and I'm wondering if we've got any sort of mechanism for making sure that, because we have changing members in certain outside bodies, that they don't get overlooked on a regular basis. So if we could have some sort of system in place whereby, even if we had a change of members in 1 year, that they certainly wouldn't go a prolonged period without being reviewed, because I do think it's important that we contribute meaningfully to these organisations, but that we do so with a sense of purpose that fills a duty for the council as well. Further to that, rather than coming back in, if you don't mind, looking at the applications for the people who are looking for us to provide member representation, I note that a couple of them don't have insurance, and not all of them have a constitution in place. And I do think that there's a safeguarding issue in relation to us as an organisation, to make sure that if we are putting members in a position whereby they're in advisory or whichever capacity, that these organisations are constituted appropriately and that they do have the appropriate insurance in place, so that we don't expose our organisation to any risk. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. I think that's a really good point on the last one. I'll turn to Tracy and Vlad on that. With respect to the first point on changes of membership, we obviously do an annual review, but I'm assuming that, Tracy, you have a sort of watching brief over the many that we do have representation on.
Yes, thanks, Chair. We've been reviewing that over the last month, so if there was 4 members appointed and perhaps one had been constant for the 12 years, we are still gathering the information on the one that's been constant. We're not just not gathering information on that body at all, so we are watching them and monitoring them, and even substitutes. If we've had substitutes that have attended a few meetings on behalf of the main member, we're also seeking their input to the review as well to make sure it's all captured.
Thank you.
If I could come back in, Chair. Yeah, I mean, what we're dealing with here is standing orders. It's a document that we refer to on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing business as we should. And I do think that if that is the case, then perhaps we should capture that in some form. Thanks.
Thank you. The second point, Vlad, in terms of insurance and constitutions and ensuring that our members are fully covered.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think the difficulty that we've got here is that we've got quite a broad church of outside bodies within the overall scheme, and as we know, there's different community groups within that, and everything from properly constituted charities right through to kind of less informed ones, and funnily enough, Councillor Drivers raised another one that we weren't aware of. So I think, absolutely, I think these are the things that members need to consider in terms of their decision making as to whether you accept the outside body into the scheme or not. It's not for officers to say whether that's acceptable or not, that's for members' decision making. But taking cognizance of obviously issues around any particular insurance or otherwise, alongside that, we can of course ask the question, but we've asked and the answer you've got in front of you. So from an officer's perspective, there are certain risks that might be taken by members in terms of their decision making alongside the information provided. That doesn't give you a clear-cut yes or no, because the officers aren't setting the criteria here. If we are to set up a criteria that has public liability insurance and everything else around it, then you might find that quite a few of the bodies won't be able to tick that box.
No, that's a very fair point, actually. Andy, do you have any further comment on that, or?
No, I just thought I'd flag it up and make sure that we as an organisation have taken it into account before we make any decisions on adopting them or otherwise. Yeah.
No, and I think it's incumbent on members to ensure that they feel comfortable as well. We've had situations in the past where members have been appointed to various trusts and did have a lot of questions to ask, around the constitution and other issues and risk and vulnerability as a trustee. So I suppose if there's any issue with members, we can flag individual situations as well. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. So I think I would support I think we need to be quite clear about our criteria for admitting or retaining outside bodies. And I'm just looking at the table, page 11, the table 1. So I think there's something there about you've got the body, the link officer. It might be helpful, and this is just a suggestion at this point, but if it actually said, what's the member role? Is it an advisor? Is it a board member? Is it a trustee? Is it, so because all of these carry with them their own, they're significant in their own right for whatever reason. I noticed, and I think what brought my attention to this was one of the proposed outside bodies was for an elected member to be an advisor to a company, basically, and it was a specified name. And I thought, well, any ward member could probably quite readily attend any group. They don't necessarily need to be a formally recognised outside body of this council that we must appoint to. And I think that's maybe where there's a wee bit of a distinction to be made, because I'm sure all ward members attend groups regularly and play a role with the groups without it needing to be an outside body. So I think that's maybe where we need to be stricter about our criteria as we sort of constantly refine and review this. So I wonder if maybe we could see a future table that said what's the role of the member on that outside body, if that would be easy to do, because I think the outside body supplies that information anyway when we ask them what they want a member for. So maybe that's an action to take away. The other thing was just about, I think it was again touched on about liability insurance and things like that, so that we're protected as a council. But yeah, I think I'm just wondering if that's an action that would be possible to carry out. Thank you.
I think it's very fair comment around the role of the member, and I think it would be also very useful, particularly for new members, sort of post an election, to understand what the involvement is and what their role within that is. Because you know yourself, you get to full council meeting and we're all appointing and nobody really knows what they're signing up to initially. So I think some additional detail around that could be quite helpful. And certainly we've had some issues with roles of trust members, as I say, in the past, which has been a bit problematic.
Thank you, Chair. If we could quickly come back on that as well, if that's okay. The other thing that we don't capture here is whether or not the member role in the outside body is remunerated. So it's not necessarily clear, although it may be of interest to the public transparency, that that, you know, as a matter of fact, the outside body actually provides some kind of benefit for the member being a member, or not, as the case may be. And there's probably only a few cases where that would be relevant, but I think that's in the interest of public transparency. That's probably wouldn't do any harm, I don't think. And I did have another point, but forgive me, I'm just sort of, my head's a bit befuddled at the moment. Yeah, so I think on one of the applications for outside bodies that we're going to be looking at, and I don't know if we're considering this just now, but
start at page 15.
Yeah. Yes, the local action group. I think, is this really to ratify something that we've agreed to appoint to anyway? Because I think this was an E&R committee for the CLLD fund, and I think we appointed Councillor Scobie at the time to sit in the local action group, which was to help with the purposes of this outside body. So it wasn't an outside body maybe formally then, but we did agree to appoint to it, I think. So I don't know if we could clarify that. Thank you.
Tracy, can you give some clarity?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As far as I know, we've not appointed yet. It's been requested by the Director of E&R that full council later on this month will appoint to that one as a matter of urgency rather than wait until the E&R committee after recess.
You content with that, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, it might be just that we now need to reappoint to that committee and recognise it within the outside bodies, but I think we did that at E&R last September or something, but to deal with incoming applications, and I think there was a bit of a rush for turnaround on that, so it might not have happened the way we'd hoped, but no, that's good to know that's coming to full council. Thank you.
Good. Vlad, just in terms of the roles that are potentially remunerated, obviously they would go into any elected member's register of interest. I don't know what the protocol would be around sort of signposting in this context.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I think that's a valid question. I've not got a particular issue with it in terms of we've got a table, obviously, of all the outside bodies, and in essence, I think what members are asking is for other columns within that, one of them being the member's role, whether that, if we can identify it in terms of whether it's an advisory or trustee and so on, and we can speak to the relevant lead officers to try and pin that down as best we can, as well as have a discussion with the elected members who have actually been representing on these bodies, because they'll have a good idea as to what's involved there. The second part on that is whether it's remunerated or not. Again, that's just another column, I think, that we just identify within the overall scheme, so that when we are appointing to it, you're very clear as to what's involved on all fronts.
That's good, yeah. I'm quite happy with that. I think the other question that I did have around some of the outside bodies and trusts was obviously that they've got officer support and officer support for members as well. But for the ones that we're assisting in potentially the administration of, it was to ensure that we're being reimbursed appropriately for some of that administration fee. And I think, Tracy, you were going to look into that and ensure that that was the case.
Yes, Chair, we did get some information back from the ward officer on a couple of trusts in Annandale and Eskdale, but we're still gathering that information and we'll make sure it's provided within the updated tables.
Brilliant, that's great. That's great. I'm not seeing any other members indicating they wish to speak. Oh, somebody in the room put their arm up, Stephen.
Yeah.
I can see somebody waving.
Yeah, sorry, I should have used the Teams chat function. Thanks, Chair. It was actually just, and you've triggered my brain cells there. So I think, yeah, so clearly we'll notice in the table that a lot of ward officers support groups in our localities, which is right and proper, but I think it does maybe follow on from the point you're making, Councillor McGregor, just about you know, what are the outside bodies getting for their bang for their buck sort of thing, and also does it present a potential delicate manoeuvre for the ward officer if they have to represent both the outside body but also maybe present an objective report to a committee in support or not of an outside body that they actually sit on as a governance officer. So I just wonder if there's a wee bit of work that we could maybe do there about how we do that as carefully as possible to still continue to support groups appropriately at the right level, if that's remunerated or paid for or otherwise, and also to make sure that officers are not impeded in writing objective reports. If that's something that we would do as a matter of course anyway, I'm not sure, but just a wee contribution there. Thank you.
No, I think it's a very, very valid point. We can maybe pick that up through other means and sort of offline, just to, because there are specific examples that I know that Councillor Thompson's thinking about, as do I, and I do think that we can end up in a sort of slight conflict at times between the role of the council and the role of the organisation. So that's maybe a conversation that we could have through, I don't know, leaders panel or something like that in the first instance, just to tease out some of those issues.
Happy with that, convener.
Yeah.
Chair, sorry, thank you.
Call me what you like. No, that's perfect.
Sorry, you're muted, Chair.
My apologies. Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody else indicating that they wish to speak. So with that, if we're happy to move to the recommendations, we're being asked to note the work undertaken to date on the review of outside bodies and changes to date as detailed in paras 3.1 to 3.8. We're happy to note. And to agree whether to recommend to full council add the three organisations. I'm not going to read the rest of it out, which I think we're quite happy to do. And agree the proposed way forward and revised timeline as detailed in paragraphs 3.10 and 3.11, and also picking up on a few of the points that we're going to take offline as well. Stephen, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I'll call you this time. I think in terms of the groups, no problem with the third one, because I think we've got an explanation for that. I think I'm a little bit, it would be a bit anomalous, I think, if we were to recommend to full council that we'll take an outside body in, but that they specify which elected member that they want. Because okay. I don't think that's proper really for us to appoint as a council. So while there might be merit in that organisation being there, it doesn't seem to be quite the way we should be doing business from our end. If it's like, can we have that guy, please? And we go, aye, that's fine. Just doesn't seem quite right. So I don't know if we should, well, I'd be uncomfortable recommending that in its current form. And similarly for a lobbying group, while I've got a lot of sympathy for the purposes of the lobbying group, you know, there's an army of elected members from all over the place that support that group. I don't know if it would be necessary for us to actually recognise that as an outside body that we must appoint to. But that's my view. You know, it's just something to feed in there. Chair, thank you.
Yeah, I certainly have a sympathy with the A75, A77 action group, because I think that you know, the council is invested in upgrades and lobbying in that respect. And we've just had a report to communities last week that was agreeing, looking at the lobbying strategy. There's another group that's appeared out the woodwork in the last week or so, which is Southwest Transport Alliance, that we're involved in and we're going to support as well, or sort of tacitly support. So as you say, I don't know whether a specific member, but maybe Vlad or Tracy, if you could give a bit of advice on that. And certainly I would be a wee bit nervous about an organisation specifying an individual rather than full council appointing an individual, if you know what I mean.
Thanks, Chair. We'll just be putting a report to full council asking to appoint to the Community-Led Local Development Fund, just given its urgency. If members agree to add the other two bodies to the list, we'll go to the relevant committees and seek appointment there, and the questionnaire will be attached, which has been supplied by the organisation. We won't be specifying in our report which member. It will be up for that committee to decide which member they appoint.
Thanks for that, Tracy. I think with that, I'm fairly comfortable then with the direction of travel. If other members are, if it's got the other two have got to go through a service committee, I'll look for a nod from Stephen. Yeah, nods from Stephen.
A shrug and a sort of laissez-faire, I'll go along with it type of thing. Thank you.
Okay. Good, so moving on to item 4, Member and Officer Protocol, report by Head of Governance and Assurance. We've got Vlad and Claire to assist us with this. And I think probably from an elected member perspective, when you first look at it, and there's quite a lot of red pen, it looks quite alarming, but I'll maybe get Vlad just to give a slight overview of the large amount of red pen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Welcome that ability to give an introduction to this, because at first sight it does look a bit overwhelming. What I'll just relay to members in regards to what you've got in front of you is that we've got very clearly a code of conduct that all elected members have to abide with, and with that code of conduct there's already a member officer protocol that's attached as part of the appendix. Now, that hasn't always been the case, and through time, local authorities have had their own member officer protocol, and they've amended that accordingly, so there's a kind of local element to the protocol. That has been the case, and we've had one member officer protocol, which is a Dumfries and Galloway member officer protocol on top of what's already in the Code of Conduct. And what we've tried to do in the review that we carried out is, in essence, compare and contrast. There's no point in repeating things if it's already encompassed within the Code of Conduct. And therefore, what you've got in front of you is that exercise. So we've carried out that exercise, and what we've tried to do is complement that with what we think is more of that localised custom and practice approach, as well as hopefully in terms of efficiencies, bring in better forms and so on for you to see everything from the media protocol right through to the kind of access to information, guidance and protocol that we've got there. So all of that we've discussed through various forums at different places, in particular in terms of the induction. If you recall, we discussed some of these issues and responsibilities that both members and officers have alongside each other. So hopefully that gives an overview as to what we're trying to do here. We're not reinventing the wheel. All we're doing is comparing and contrasting with what you've already got in the Code of Conduct, and thereafter adding the Dumfries and Galloway element of it.
Thanks very much for that, Vlad. I'll open the floor to members. Archie?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I'm quite comfortable with this, but after listening to Vlad, it was like, if I don't catch you with the Dumfries and Galloway member officer protocol, I'll catch you with this one, and if I do catch you with that, I'll catch you with the Code of Governance. So there, I don't have any problems with this. It is, as you say, quite a lot of red stroke through ink on the report itself. But I think we're all used to member officer protocol now, and I don't have anything that I would change. All I would ask is maybe, Vlad, is if you if you check with the APSI 2 tribes research, then you may get something else to add into there or not.
2 tribes research. Come on, you're going to have to elaborate. What's that?
It's a bit of research I've done a couple of years ago on the role of elected members and officers, and the changing world in which we lived in during COVID and then after COVID as well. So it's just about making sure that, you know, there's been a lot of changes in local government over the last number of years because of COVID, and that research has brought up some interesting facts.
Thanks, Archie. I've got Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Looking at page 35, the point 5.1, I'm just wondering, does that expose members to a double jeopardy? And it may be that just that's how I'm reading it, but I don't know. But when we look at 5.2, and then not the red that's scored up beneath it, but the red that's underlined beneath that, 5.2 says, where a member has an interest in a member of an outside body, he or she may be required to declare an interest where a matter arises. But in the underlined one, it says, where a member of an outside body has been appointed, this does not constitute a connection that might lead to a member having to declare an interest. So they seem to be a little bit at odds with one another. So I'm not sure if that black should be there and it should just be the red underlined or whatever. So if we could just have a clarification on that. And then on page 53, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th bullet point down, it's talking about how members behave, and it says where they try to overturn a casework decision that has been delegated to employees to make. And I'm wondering how that affects things like the local review body, where that is the role of members to perhaps overturn the decisions of officers. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Flag, can you pick up on those points?
Yeah, we'll just start with the first one. I think the first one, again, is that it's a straight lift, if I recall, from the Code of Conduct as it stands. In terms of the connection part, now what we could do is maybe go away and look at it to see whether we can make it read better, but certainly what's there, I'm pretty certain is accurate in terms of that second part of the red, which has been included, so that's in line with also the briefing that I've issued to members in terms of connection and interest. So what we can do is certainly look at to see whether we can make it read better, because I take the point around 5.2 at the start. It doesn't seem to quite match, so we'll maybe work on that with officers. The second part, sorry, I didn't quite catch the LRB matter.
Yeah, there was a first part where it was 5.1 talking about the fact that as a member of the council, another body or organisation, clearly you can be held to account by their terms and conditions or code of conduct, and then you have the council's code of conduct as well, and I'm just wondering if there's a double jeopardy risk there. Then the LRB, it was on page 53, I think. Yeah, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th bullet point down. Thanks.
Yeah, it was the one around overturning a casework decision on page 53.
Oh, thank you. Okay, in terms of the double jeopardy mention and reference, I think it'll probably be helpful. I know there's guidance that we can relay to members, and maybe what we could do is put a reference to that here in terms of your role with outside bodies, so that there is some really good guidance out there that addresses some of that. Now, as I mentioned, I think in the induction process, absolutely there are at times you've been asked to do lots of roles, and yes, you have to abide by your own code of conduct in terms of an elected member code of conduct. But if, for example, you're a trustee of a trust, then you have to abide by their constitution and their standing orders and their relevant scheme of delegations as such within that. So there is a kind of dual having to comply with the relevant both council code of conduct in terms of doing your job within that body as a representative of the council, but also in terms of that particular organisation's role that you will have to play. And I think as I said, I think what the most important part here is to maybe reflect that and have that reference to the guidance, so that members can look at the guidance and see how that will help you. What I would suggest is the guidance is there and available, and we'll make that reference, but more importantly, you've always got the contact of governance officers if at any point you feel that there's an issue that you wish to raise, and we can discuss that in an individual and confidential basis. So I often get members coming to me on these kind of conflict matters. That's not an issue at all, and that we're here to provide that guidance. In regards to the LRB point, which I think was in 53, if I could just read, I think it's bullet point 5, is it? Where members may inappropriately seek to get involved in operational matters, including where a member tries to overturn casework decision that has been delegated to employees to make. Now, I take your point in terms of the LRB's role is to look at employees, but I think what this is in reference to is not doing it through the right process. Now, the LRB is a quasi-judicial function, and that's an appropriate governance all set up around it, so that would be covered. It'd be more about members' interference with delegated functions, so not so much governance that's quite clearly set out within our constitutional documents, including standing orders, but more about members trying to interfere with decisions of planning or otherwise, other operational matters that are quite clearly delegated.
Are you quite happy with that, Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if, I mean, obviously this is a straight lift from a national document, so I'm not sure that we at this level should be interfering, but perhaps it's something we should feed back up, that little bit of clarification might be assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, sorry, did you want to come in at this point as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just to clarify, if I can, and sort of confirming what Vlad said, but looking at 5.2 on page 35, the black type there is referring to a circumstance where a member might be a member of an outside body in a private capacity, whereas the red underlined text is talking about where a member has been appointed to sit on an outside body on behalf of the council. So I'm not sure whether I'm stating the obvious there, but I'm trying to be helpful.
I think that's helpful.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, yeah, I do find that helpful, but clearly it's not clear within the paperwork, and as I say, this is standing orders, which we as a council are saying is our Bible for how we should work by. It should be a little bit clearer, I would suggest. Thanks.
It's the wording maybe just needs slightly tidied up in the sense that it maybe doesn't need to refer to an outside body that a member sits on in a personal capacity. It would be a group or an organisation. I think that the use of outside body makes it sound as if it's more formal than it actually is. So maybe, Vlad, if we could just tweak the wording for that and come back to members with an update on what it should look like, if that would be okay, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair.
Good. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So a similar point, I think maybe our use of outside body is sort of OB, capital O, capital B, whereas obviously the meaning is intended to be in a private capacity of another organisation, so that would be helpful. I think as well we've had a recent briefing on connections or declaring connections or a transparency, and I'm just wondering, do we need to maybe reflect that in the language about declaring an interest? Because I think we're still, as members, coming to terms with how we declare our connection to bodies over recent times. And just the other thing was the use. I'm glad to see the sort of updates around chair and vice chair, because obviously we have this arrangement where chairs and vice chairs have a kind of equality in terms of being informed, or where it refers to it in the document. But I think on page 39 it talks about the 9.2, official letters, for example, and sort of informally, Archie and I have just signed one as Chair and Vice Chair, not to go into any detail about that, but should that reflect where it says Leader, Deputy Leader, Chair of a committee, should that also include Vice Chair, for example? And I think similarly at page 42, when it's talking about conveners, and I know that we have one convener but many chairs and vice chairs, is there something there just to clarify that that might also mean vice chairs? So I think it's maybe just about that consistency throughout. Otherwise, I think everything else is okay. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Yeah, fair comment. Vlad?
Yeah, in terms of the conflict of interest and the connection, I think that's a valid point. Again, we've got a briefing already. I'm just wondering if we just attach that as an appendix to it. That would probably address that point. That way we've got quite a clear guidance within that. And what we'll do is put a reference within the protocol as it stands to that appendix in terms of any conflicts of interest. Hopefully the briefing was helpful. If it's not, I would want the feedback just so that we can amend that prior to putting this to full council. So that's on the conflict of interest. In terms of the chair and vice chair points, I think that's a valid point, and we'll take that away with the relevant officers to make those amendments.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy fix, isn't it? Any other members wishing to come in at this point? Not seeing any indications. No, okay, with that, we're being asked to recommend to full council the draft member officer protocol for agreement. We've obviously made a few comments that will be tweaked slightly in the document, and hopefully we'll pick that up again at full council if you're all happy with that. Not seeing any dissent. So on to item 5, which is a review of standing orders in the schemes. Again, report by Head of Governance and Assurance. And Vlad and Claire are here to speak to this. Do you have anything to add at this stage, Vlad, Claire? Or do you want me to go to members?
No further comments on the report.
Okay, good. Councillor Dryborough?
Thanks, Leader. And you know, I don't have any problem with the process, things like that, but the review of standing orders and the schemes, there was a lot changed during COVID, for instance, and when we had to change them, we had to move to sort of 3-day, you know, getting the reports in 3 days. I think it was 6.2, if I remember, in standing orders, that members had to get the reports 3 days in advance, whereas it used to be 7 days. We're coming out of COVID now, and I think one of the issues that certainly my group are seeing is that the 3-day reports are just too short a period of time because of the 1,500 pages that we're all getting and things like that in some of the reports. So I would like to ask for that quick check of, you know, the review that we did during COVID, and perhaps change that particular one, 6.2, to go back to 7 days as opposed to 3 days.
Thanks, Archie. I'll bring Vlad in, but my understanding was that we were operationally working to sort of 7 to 10 day sort of window rather than the 3, and that's only used in very extreme last minute circumstances. But Vlad, do you want to pick up on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll come in first if that's okay, and then I'll bring in Claire if that's all right with you, Chair. In terms of there's a 3-day statutory and that's set in legislation, so we can't tamper with that in terms of what our overall duty is. Obviously the council can decide as to what the timescale is, but the timescale is much more generous than that, and that's what officers are always striving to do. Claire will give you the kind of ins and outs of that process. What I would suggest is that sometimes it's not within the gift of officers in terms of the requests that come in, and also the timescale for doing these things aren't always within our own control. So certainly officers will try and at all times to meet, and we're quite tight in governance, making sure that we meet the bigger timescale, which is that kind of 7 to 10 days that you're talking about. But from time to time, in urgent type matters in particular, we won't be meeting that timescale, and absolute urgency. There might be reports that don't meet the statutory, but again, the statutory allows for that, as well as our own standing orders. They're probably worthwhile noting as well that there's been a significant increase in motions to full council, and I think we've got 7 or so coming up to this one. We had 9 for the last one. That's a significant piece of work for officers, and again to ask them to meet a deadline of, in essence, just to give you an example, deadlines today in terms of the motions, but then the printing deadline is the Friday. That's a very quick turnaround for officers to compile 7 reports. So we need to take cognizance of that as well in terms of meeting those deadlines. But I'll pass on to Claire in terms of giving you the protocol as it stands.
Okay,
Thanks, Vlad.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Driver is quite correct. We did have a very quick turnaround for papers when we're running the COVID-19 subcommittee, running to the 3-day statutory requirements. The custom and practice that we operate currently is that we strive to have our papers available, so they're available 2 clear Mondays in advance of the meeting. So political groups have got the papers for 2 Monday meetings in advance of the actual meeting. So the papers, for example, for this meeting were issued a week last Friday electronically, and that's what we aim for. So it should really be 10 days plus for most meetings.
Can I come in just with another issue that was raised with Chair on, and it was to do with actual papers being received by members and them actually being here in the council offices as opposed to delivered to their home address. Now, I know that some members put here as the address on their election paperwork and things like that, but there were some who were expecting them to get those papers at home. It's just maybe an action to have a look at that rather than anything else, not so much to do with the paper, Chair.
No, absolutely, Archie. And at the end of the day, this is a review, so we can put into it whatever we wish. And I think that maybe even just a survey of members as to whether they wish to receive paper copies at all, or whether they wish to go entirely electronically unless otherwise notified. And then, as you say, where that paperwork goes to, that could, I would hope, easily form part of the review, Vlad.
Yeah, got absolutely no issue with that, Chair, and I think that's a reasonable way forward in terms of just looking to address the points that Councillor Drivers brought up. I think within the delivery of papers, again, some of that might be as a result of the kind of timescale, and at times I'm aware that there'd be no point in posting it because it wouldn't get there in time for the member. So I think we've definitely taken that decision previously, where we knew that it just was not going to get to the members, particularly around bank holidays and so on.
Thanks, Vlad. On the other issue of motions, which you've raised as well, Vlad, is there a merit in looking at having the deadline earlier so that it's not as close to printing? Because I'm very aware that teams within various departments, if they've got to do a quick report for a motion, it's not often a quick report, and we maybe need to look at the timelines for that. I'd take other members' views on that as well. But Vlad, could we wire that into the review as well?
Thank you, Chair. I think you've maybe read my mind, or you were maybe a fly on the wall in the conversations I was having with officers earlier. So we're carrying out maybe a small kind of benchmarking exercise around that, and I think that's appropriate that that's included within the proposals moving forward for us to look at that specific question.
Good. Thanks very much, Vlad. Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was literally just about to suggest such a thing as well. However, also to follow up on Councillor Driver's comments, I do think that predominantly people do get the papers to home, but I've got like the Stewardship Licensing Committee. They always come to headquarters. They never come home, and when I've contacted them, they've said exactly that. On your documentation it says headquarters, but yet all my other papers come home. So there are some glitches in there somewhere, I think. Thanks, Chair.
So Vlad, that would maybe be another action to ensure that papers out with the main service committees that are done through licensing or other forums have all got the same consistent information about where things are getting sent to. And we'll need to wire that into the review as well, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yeah, that might not be so much in terms of the review. I would suggest that that's one for us offline to take on board. I think that absolutely, if members are needing paper sent home, then that choice should be made clear to anyone sending the relevant paperwork. As I said, there would be the odd exception as a result of some of those papers, and licensing is one that we can certainly take on board as it falls within my portfolio, so I'll chase that up.
Good. And I suppose my last question would be that there's a lot of stuff in this review timeline and what we're going to be looking at. Presumably some of that will be caveated by the Chief Executive's, in quotes, restructure. And could be influenced by that process as well. So it's just how we report that back through. I believe that that's to come to members in September time.
Through you, Chair, yes. We've tried to accommodate this and dovetail it as best we can within that overall review, and as members will see within 3.4 table, what we're looking at is a report coming in terms of recommendations from the subcommittee considered by full council by the end of the year. That should give us enough time to in essence dovetail and compare and contrast with what we're proposing through the review of standing orders alongside any changes to scheme or delegations that might materialise in due course.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute sense. We don't want to be conflicting with anything in the upcoming months, so I'd be quite happy with that. Is there any other member wishing to come back in at this point?
I think Councillor Thompson, and then if I could then come back after that, Chair,
yep.
Just one amendment to the report.
Yep. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just very quick, and it was just on the scope and timeline of the review, just because I suppose licensing was mentioned a few times there, but we had, I suppose, set a course to have a look at how we do licensing panels, licensing boards, I should say, and it was just really maybe to see, would that feature as part of this, or would that be reported on separately to the relevant committee?
Vlad?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you. That's one of the projects that we're carrying out within the licensing function itself, so that will very clearly report in due course. I suspect that might come through both the review of standing orders subcommittee, because we will have seminars for elected members, but also through the licensing boards themselves, because they need to be obviously consulted and engaged in terms of the way forward, as well as ultimate decision making, which will be for full council in terms of the overall structure.
Thanks, Vlad. Are you happy with that, Stephen?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay, with
Chair,
that, I'll...
Sorry to interrupt, if that's okay.
You want to come back in, Vlad? Yeah, absolutely.
It's just been pointed out that maybe just a wee change to 3.4 table in October on the right-hand column that says detail, instead of report to review of standing orders subcommittee, that should really say workshop. So that's where we'll carry out, we'll change that to workshop, and then as you can see, the report will then flow from that.
Perfect, thanks. No, that's absolutely fine. So we'll make that amendment. Nobody else indicating to speak. Good. So we'll move to the recommendations, and we've been asked to consider the update, which we've done, and we've added a few points to it, which Vlad and Claire will take forward now. You're all quite happy with that? No dissent, good. Well, I haven't been notified of any urgent business, so I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today, and as I say, sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'll hopefully catch up with you soon. I'll go and do my health and safety lifting course fairly soon. Thanks again.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.